Warning: this episode contains discussion of mental health, self-harm, suicide, and suicidal ideation. If you or a loved one are in crisis, contact the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, 1-800-273-TALK, 1-800-273-8255, or the crisis text line at 741-741. I'm Jeff Johnston, host of the Living Undeterred Project, and I am excited for our guest today. Steve Phillip is from Harrogate, England. Did I get that correct, Steve?
That's absolutely right. North Yorkshire. We've got to get Yorkshire.
Yorkshire,
there,
okay,
Jeff,
sure,
well.
absolutely.
The county of Yorkshire.
I was on the map looking around to see where you're from, and last time I was in your backyard was about 15 years ago. But I will say I had a lovely experience. Had a chance to see a lot of Europe, and that was great. But we're not talking about that today. We're going to talk about something that's near and dear to your heart. And I have a saying that you've heard me say many times, and that's purpose becomes passion when it gets personal. And often in our life, we get into some advocacy or some mission, like a calling, and it comes from the result of, for you and I, it was an unfortunate phone call. Your call came on December 4th, 2019. Mine came on October 4th, 2016. So, Steve, I think with that, why don't we introduce you, tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll navigate through our topic today, which I do want to throw out there, and we'll have our normal trigger warning out there that we're going to be talking about a sensitive topic today that affects many, 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 many people globally, a little bit less than 1 million per year globally. Nonetheless, welcome.
No, thank you, Jeff. As you rightly say, kind of my story all began with a phone call, which I'll come back to that happened on December the 4th. But like many people I've spoken to over the last couple of years, I'd spent 30 years working in senior management, in consultancy. I'd been the director of a leadership and management training company, working with some large multinational companies, and in 2009 kind of plowed my own furrow, made a decision to set up a coaching practice, and my world for the past 11 and a half years up until the end of 2019 had been to specialize in social media. Even though I'm not a young millennial, you can tell that from the video today. I kind of stumbled into it, and LinkedIn particularly, kind of understood the power of that and started going out to large businesses from Harley Davidson to Toyota to the British Red Cross and all kinds of law firms and business schools and universities. And not just in the UK, had clients kind of all over the globe, really, scattered around, and was showing them how to get the most from sharing their brand and their business via various social media channels. Never has that become more important to me than it is now, really. It was just such a day, actually, working with a large automotive group in the UK, in the Midlands, here not far from Birmingham, there, that I got into my car after a full day. It'd been quite a full-on day, but a very satisfying day. Felt pretty good. Knew I'd got about a 3-hour journey back home at a busy peak time on the motorways, and literally put my phone into the holder on the dash and got an incoming call from my son's girlfriend, Charlotte, and I had no reason to suspect it was going to be anything other than a call to see how you're doing. I mean, she didn't call often, so it was maybe a little unusual, but no, I remember writing this in an article that I published, within a few weeks afterwards, that the call with Charlotte was logged at 2 minutes on my phone when I subsequently checked. I remember about the first 15 seconds of it when, she just uttered the words and just said, I'm sorry, I'm really sorry, Steve, it's Jordan. And I don't know how many times she said sorry, but just said he's killed himself. And from that moment onwards at 4:22 on the 4th of December, my life just kind of changed out of or recognition, and that's kind of the background to kind of why we're here
Mm-hmm.
today, Jeff.
As you tell that story, I obviously hearkened back to my moment and relived it, and it was a phone call at 6:30 in the morning, and I just remember, like you said, amount of time transpired, but I only remember certain parts of it. And there's a weird
Mm.
dynamic with this for anyone out there that's lost a loved one. Is it feels like sometimes it's been 100 years, but then sometimes it feels like 100 seconds, and it goes back and forth like an accordion. Like some days, the rawness of the pain is intense, almost as the day it was when I found out that Seth had been poisoned with fentanyl. And I'm sure you go through the same thing. And then you go periods of times where you feel like I'm doing really good, and things are great, and I feel like my grief is I'm not won this battle, but I'm certainly better off than I was. And all of a sudden, boom, something happens, and you go right back to that rawness of that pain. And do you feel yourself playing that narrative and often?
Yeah, I mean it's a term that I've used very often. This, it kind of it's 2 years plus now,
Mm-hmm.
and yet it can feel at times like 2 minutes.
Right.
It's an interesting one for me because it's something I kind of challenge myself. I have this internal dialogue with myself. I just come away from a meeting this morning and part of a group of guys working together. Something I know we're going to talk about, the Baton of
Yeah, I
Hope, and
cannot wait
something
to
we're
hear about
involved
that.
with. And Mike, one of the guys in our group there, it's just literally a few days past his son's anniversary.
Wow.
Ross took his own life, age 31, on the 21st of February, and last year. And to what he's still, Mike, in a lot of
Mm,
pain and kind of really struggling, and
absolutely.
it takes me back. You kind of look back to 12 months on for us, and but also that I the internal dialogue I have with myself is that I do have these prolonged periods of time where you kind of think, well, I'm doing
Right.
okay, I'm here, I'm having this conversation
Right.
today, I'm not breaking down, I'm not not in a mess, although there's always moments that happen during any conversation, I know, but and I kind of question that sometimes. It's odd. How am I able to
Mm-hmm.
kind of function, particularly given what I'm dealing with every day in my new career,
Yeah.
let's call
Yeah.
it that, where I mention Jordan's name
Right.
every second, every minute of every day, look at the photographs on whether it's the website or talk about suicide,
Yep.
I do have this internal dialogue with myself that says, how are you able to do that? And I suppose even question, is that right? That must have been a really odd thing to
Yeah.
listen to. But should I not be a complete mess? So
Right.
there's some odd things kind of go through my head at time in relation to what I'm doing and what we've been through. Really.
I can certainly relate to that. And anyone watching this can relate to that as well. There's at times a sense of guilt, like I should be more tortured. I should be an alcoholic. I should be, you know, I should be depressed. Yet I haven't allowed myself to participate in those traditional narratives. And so, what attracted me to your story, and obviously a lot of what I'm doing, and as you are as well, Steve, is LinkedIn. And LinkedIn has been a really nice place to share our stories and get tremendous amount of affirmation, support, validation, what we're doing. I've met some absolute, and I got the hair standing up on my arm. I mean, some people that are just heroes in my eyes, and you do too every day. And people look at me, I would assume, as somebody that maybe fits that description, that I survived these things. But then I look at people like you and Steve Grant and all the people I've had on the show in the past. Steve lost his only two sons to overdoses, Chris and Kelly. He was on my first. When I wrote my book, I consulted Steve, but Steve's children died 20 years ago, before fentanyl, before all this stuff was a household name. And so I look at what you were doing on LinkedIn, and I thought to myself, I have a choice to spend my days around people that are in misery, that are suffering, that are just, being held back, or I could find people like Steve Phillip, reach out to them, get to know them. And I don't know where our relationship's going to go, but your passion you have helps me. I mean, you're a mentor to me, Steve. And sorry if I get a little bit emotional, but I need mentors. I need people I can look up to. And I know I provide that for people to look up to me. And we're all fallible. And even as recent as 4 or 5 months ago, and I don't know if I've told you this, but I had my first brush with suicidal ideation. And maybe I'll share with you sometime off the podcast.
Yeah.
But it worried me because I'd been through already the death of my son and my wife to alcohol, and then was doing the podcast and all this advocacy, but I had a slip up. And where I'm going with this, and I could ask you about your thoughts on this, was I skipped some of my traditional ways that I was doing daily. I stopped meditation for about a week. I didn't work out for a week. I became overconfident that I had conquered this grief that I was going through. Do you find yourself each day sticking to a routine that you have to stick to? And if you took a shortcut, do you feel that you could possibly slip like I did almost 4 or 5 months ago? I just thought I'd throw that out there to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting, and again, maybe I consider myself to be a bit of an odd beast. I don't know that, my routine is a large part of the work that I do now. So the routine is get to the desk at 8 o'clock in the morning, and work through till whatever 5:30, 6 o'clock at night, and just try and kind of switch off there. Um, but yeah, I mean, there are no hard and fast patterns that I've had to adopt, if you like, to keep me on track. I was one of those people that didn't really go for any counselling. I did attend 1.5 sessions, really at the behest of the family, and thought maybe I should, and then kind of got there and didn't really know why I was there, and couldn't see kind of the value or how it might help. Did I need help?
Right.
In the very early days, I experienced fairly significant trauma, which manifested itself physically. So I knew then that I was going through what I was going through and struggling to sleep and all those things. But no, interestingly, it says a lot perhaps for human resilience generally, the capacity that I think we all have. But again, I have had this internal dialogue with myself that kind of says, why haven't I had to adopt some very specific routines to help me keep going? And maybe I have, maybe unconsciously, Jeff, I've done that because I kind of question what allows me to do what I'm doing in the way that I am, and to function, reasonably healthily, I would say, in most cases. Don't get me wrong, those moments will come, I was aware even lying in bed this morning and waking up, and, thoughts go to Jordan, as they do very often, and suddenly I felt the head twitch and thought, okay, here we go. Just take the thoughts away. And I think what's helped me are a couple of things. One is, I suppose, the immense focus, distraction, let's call it, by doing what I'm doing and kind of serving other people, perhaps. Right. Perhaps that has been able to take away from myself a little bit, because it's often about other people now.
Right.
But also the fact that I've kind of, I have this routine that I do stick to, and now I think about it, it's part of my life every day. But behind me, I'll just step aside a little bit. You'll see some framed small photographs, and just here, a baseball cap of Jordan's, and a very well worn photograph. And my routine is each morning, I hold that cap, and I squirt a bit of his aftershave that's still left, his cologne on there, and smell that. And those photographs are actually of a really special trip that Jordan and I took to Italy, to the Amalfi Coast, when he was first diagnosed with clinical depression, just shortly afterwards in 2015. And he wasn't looking forward to the trip, because Jordan didn't look forward to anything. It was part of the depression and anxiety. Right. But, he came away saying it was one of the best holidays he's ever had. And we just had a great time, and really helped us to bond, even closer. So my routine is, each morning before I sit down to this laptop and start work, is I talk about the day ahead with Jordan, what we've got planned, and what's been happening. And before I go to bed each night, my wife knows she's got to clear off out of the way. Get upstairs, and I'll talk to Jordan about the day.
Yeah.
And kind of look, at a conscious level, I know it's not Jordan, that I'm talking to, but has that helped? It certainly hasn't harmed. And maybe in an odd sort of way, the fact that I have that kind of dialogue and those other processes just allow me to function as I do. Or maybe I'm just an odd beast, Jeff. I don't know.
No, I'm
Maybe
listening to what
you know.
everything you do, even down to the cologne. I have some cologne of Seth's as well, and his daughter was born 3 weeks after he died. And as far as I can understand, he wasn't 100% sure it was his daughter because they had broken
Oh,
up.
right.
So every time Brighton comes over, she's 5 now. I say, which cologne do you want to smell like daddy today? And she'll take it and she'll spray it and put it on, and then she'll go show everybody. And so that to me is just precious to have that opportunity to, now I have a granddaughter that can, I can remind myself. But I am kind of like you, I guess, is that I have trained my brain to not really fall prisoner to some of these narratives that are so popular. Like one with grieving parents is a forever date. I see a lot of parents saying, they'll say, well, my son is forever 23, like the day he died. Well, I don't do that. So that's 28 to me right now. He's in my heart. I talk to him like you talk to Jordan. So again, these are just little things I've done that help me. And I think when you consult people, and that's kind of what you and I do really, is we consult people to help them to get through these things. I always tell them whatever works for you, as long as it's not destructive, it's got to be constructive. You've got to be building
Yeah.
towards something. You can't be drinking yourself. You can't be hanging around toxic people that are dragging you down. And I think there's a lot to say to that. Let's do this. I do want to know more about Jordan. You talked about depression, and one thing I was going to ask you is, when I got the call that Seth had died, I was not shocked. He had for 5 or 6 years been a substance abuser. He'd been incarcerated. He actually just got out of prison before he died. He was just, spinning that wheel, where death is, like on the wheel, and he kept spinning it.
Mhm.
And October 4th was his day that it was time. So even with Jordan's depression, did you have any inkling that this was something he would consider doing?
No, not at all. Not for
Wow.
1 minute. Whether other members of the family, and particularly his mother and I divorced back in 2005, but we were very close relationship. And her background was as a senior psych nurse, mental health nurse for more than 20 years, and I think she would have had concerns, possibly more than me. And it's kind of one of the reasons why I do what I do now, and why I share what I do in the way that I do with people, is that I often say my knowledge of mental health 2 and a bit years ago, on a scale of 1 to 10, was probably a good solid 2.
Yeah, agree.
I didn't
Right.
understand it really. I had a son with depression, and he coped with that by going back to the doctors every so often for antidepressants.
Hmm.
When he felt he was getting low, he didn't like to be on them, so he would come off. So he would go, unfortunately, through a cycle that we know is not good,
Hmm.
and we know that particularly can be devastating, of course. Um, and Jordan was Jordan. He could have his low moods, but he kind of been like that. He was lovely guy. Just loving son, and great mate, great friend to have to many. But he could have his moments where he was a bit low
Hmm.
and a bit quiet. But in some ways, Jordan to us had kind of always been
Yeah, you were
that
used to
kind of
it.
person. So we knew, we'd obviously been through periods, particularly in 2015 when he was really at a very low point. But even then, the thought of suicide never crossed
Had you ever threatened?
my
Had you
mind.
ever
I
talked
didn't
about
know.
it?
I'm one of these people who.
Had
Sorry.
you ever threatened or talked about it, or?
He never talked about it, but we do know now, Jeff. One of the things in the aftermath
Sure.
of, and I'm sure you've been through similar, processes, that, we spent a lot of time at Jordan's house afterwards, and getting it ready for sale,
Hmm.
and clearing out his home. He owned his own house, and we found a box of belongings in the loft upstairs, and in there were journals from the years. They were never fully completed for a full year, but
Wow.
they were maybe a month and a half, 2 months at a time, and they were really enlightening for us because they showed Jordan's thoughts. They showed his struggles with his own lack of self-worth and lack of self-belief and lack of achievement in life. Um, but I remember one day just looking at a particular page as we read through. We brought the books home to our house here, um, and then I read that line, from 2015 in May. Bearing in mind that this is just a few weeks before Jordan and I went to Italy,
Oh, okay.
and that line that said, "I've been researching methods of suicide again today,
Wow.
and I found this." He puts a description of the medication there. It's quite expensive, some comment, but there it was in black and white. So, knowing what I know now, we know that suicidal ideation is very rarely an impulsive thing. It's something that's thought through. It can take years to manifest itself to where it becomes an action, and very often it doesn't become an action.
Right.
A lot of people have suicidal ideation and don't take that step. But clearly this was something Jordan had been considering, for at least 4 or 5 years, and I would probably surmise, before then as well, really. But no, you never crossed my mind, certainly for 1 minute, and I don't think anyone else that knew Jordan would for one moment have thought he would ever be considering anything like that at all.
So let's talk a little bit about the parents and brothers and sisters and family members that suspect somebody's considering suicide. How do we approach them in a manner that is effective and not be so dancing around the topic that we don't get to what we want to ask? And those are some of the tough questions. And on your profile, I noticed that this statistic is just absolutely jaw-dropping. 800,000 people a year globally take their own lives. That's, by the time this podcast is over, we're going to have 60 humans have taken their life just by the time you and I get done talking. That is just first of all, it's unacceptable as a society that we can't find ways to have these conversations at a more intimate human level to understand why people make these decisions. And obviously it's their choice, it's their life. They can do what they wish, but there's got to be other means to get out of these things. So I can't remember my initial question I asked you because I got distracted by that 800,000 globally. Because to me that's just not acceptable. We have to figure out a way to make this better. I know what my question was. How do we talk to people that we suspect are having these thoughts and not say the wrong thing? That's my biggest fear, of saying the wrong. And then all of a sudden somebody does it and I'm like, I wish I never would have even brought it up. It's like, what's your suggestion?
Your question's really timely, Jeff, not least because literally about 30 minutes before coming on air with yourself, I've just shared a post actually on LinkedIn on this very topic.
I saw it.
Yeah, a brilliant video by Tom Robinson, a guy I got to know who's had his own struggles. But a couple of things, just briefly to go back to those statistics for a moment. One of the things I've realized is when you share the big numbers, the 800,000 or whatever they would be, or there's so many million people starving in Ethiopia or wherever it may be, those numbers are often too big for people really to get their head around. And often I fear they can wash over people. But when you kind of break it down and say, look, it's one person every 40 seconds takes their life, I can kind of relate to that much more. So when you break it down to more manageable numbers, I think it suddenly hits home to people much more. So interestingly enough, where I was kind of sharing the big numbers historically, when I started out, I've kind of moved now more towards the very specific kind of numbers there that people can get their head around, really. So that's one thing on the statistics. In terms of having the conversation, I think without question what this is about now is just trying to I'm going to use the word normalize.
Mm-hmm.
It seems an odd word to talk about normalizing a conversation around suicide, because to most people it would not seem a normal conversation to have.
Mm-hmm.
But look, we're not that many years past, where we wouldn't talk about cancer.
Mm-hmm.
Cancer was not a word anyone wanted to mention that they had. So the big C, I remember,
Mm-hmm.
very popular. I think it was a US drama, if I remember rightly, the big C.
Mm-hmm.
And but we have to get to the point with suicide that we are with cancer. Now we have to recognise it as the manifestation of an illness, if you like. Quite often, mental health, not exclusively so, but
Right.
the majority are. Um, but we have to start being able to have this conversation very upfront. And you asked very specifically about how would we have that conversation. It's one of the things that I coach and share and talk about now with organisations and groups that I speak to. I think there are a number of steps. I think the steps are that we need to become more attuned and more alert to people who are possibly struggling,
Mm-hmm.
possibly feeling suicidal. The obvious question there for anyone listening to this would be, well, how would I know? What are the signs? Well, there are, very clear signs, and there's a lot of material out there now online, and that'll talk about just subtle changes in behaviour,
Right.
which can be from lack of sleep to suddenly drinking more to low mood to just the way someone's not keeping themselves presented in the way that they would have done before. There are lots of signs that would tell you that somebody is not behaving in a way that they would have done before, and that would prompt a conversation to take place.
Yeah, I think one of the issues is that we have a tough enough time being attentive to our own issues. How in the world can we be attentive to somebody else's? And again, that's a disconnect. That's
Yeah,
a disconnect we have in society with social media, with people's illusion that they can do 5 to 7 tasks simultaneously successfully, which we now know that humans can do about 2 consciously. And so you look at social media and where that's played a role in especially adolescent suicide. I was going to throw this at you to ask you about some of the societal issues, and where's this hopelessness coming from? Where is the thing that says somebody, I have no other option than to take my own life? That seems to me that there's a sense of hopelessness there, that they just don't see any way out of this other than that way.
yeah,
I think that's a fault as a society, as in a way, that we've just kind of painted ourselves in this corner with, especially imposter syndrome and gaslighting and all these things that you can see that are perpetuated on social media, especially towards the kids. And it's probably no wonder why we have a lot of depressed, anxious adolescents today. Now I know Jordan was 31, but it seems like he had
yeah. He's 30. No, he's 30. He's 34.
34.
Yeah,
I'm sorry,
34.
but I'm sure these things manifested when he was 18, 19, 20 as well. So I thought I'd ask you maybe what your thoughts are on social media and influence on depression, anxiety, and why kids feel that that's
Yeah,
a viable way to deal with their problems.
We know that the issues around suicide are very, very complex. There's no one reason. We often look for a reason, don't we? Certainly as bereaved families, when we've lost a loved one, what was the reason? And it's far more complex. And with my much better understanding of mental health and suicidal drivers now, because being immersed in this subject, I can see potential drivers and events through Jordan's life, from very major traumatic events in his life. We're not talking about abuse or
Right.
anything like that here, and certainly Jordan wasn't into excessive amounts of alcohol or drugs or anything like that at all. But we had some significant moves to when we moved to Canada when he was very young, and then decided not to settle there several years later to come back. We know he had issues of being bullied at school
Yeah.
when he came back to the UK because he stood out and was a little different. There were early kind of teenage relationship issues, the breakdown of his parents' marriage. There are a number of things that we know that are kind of a build-up of these types of traumas through that particular adolescence and teenage, early 20 years. can have a big impact on people as they grow older. So to some degree, and coupled with that, Jordan was quite a sensitive type of lad, and had been from a young age. We know there was potentially more risk, let's say, that Jordan might have chosen that path compared with other people, and but it's very complex. But if you look at the societal issues, the question you asked there, then, what is it? Why are we losing? Why is suicide the biggest killer of young men under 35? Because that's the stat. Forget the 800,000 globally, just for a moment, because it's hard to put faces to that. But I want you to think of young men age 35. Think of any young man age 35 and younger, and our own boys, and think that suicide is the biggest killer. So not road traffic accidents, not cancer, not heart disease, not diabetes. It's suicide. So let's put that into perspective for a moment. What are the pressures that are driving young men and young women as well, to determine that is an outcome for them? And a lot of it is societal pressures that we've created. So from a male perspective, something that we've often hear referred to as toxic masculinity, this caricature of a man that's been created from our previous generations, that men are supposed to be the breadwinners, the leaders, they're supposed to behave in a certain way, and when they can't do, they obviously feel they're falling short. We've got the pressures of having to succeed now. In my day, going to university was something that a kind of a top echelon of kids did.
Right.
Now there's an expectation that everyone goes to
Right.
university. Everyone takes on that student debt here in the UK
Yeah.
that lives with them almost forever, that most feel they're never going to pay back. We have a property market here, particularly if you live in somewhere like London in the UK, that most young people getting their first job have not got a hope of getting on the property market. And if they do, they've got another huge pressure and a huge burden. And then we move towards things like social media, for example, where everybody portrays their best self,
Sure.
usually,
Yep.
and everyone makes comparisons with themselves against the best self of other people. And the moment we can't compare in how we look and what we're doing and where we're going on holiday and the cars we drive and
Right.
all these things, there are added pressures there. And most of these experiences take place, from anywhere from teenage years through 20s to a point where you get to early 30s, where you're kind of looking at your life. And now I'm looking back to Jordan's journals now, and what he wrote about, what he hasn't achieved yet in life and where he felt he should
Hmm.
be. My question to Jordan would be, what measures were you using?
Right.
Because you had a whole bunch of
Right.
friends that would look at you as being the guy who traveled
Right.
to the Far East and did all sorts on his own, that had a great job, had a beautiful girlfriend, had his own house,
Yeah.
own
Sure.
car, that was the guy that lit up the room, at the parties or wherever it was. To the outside world, Jordan had everything going for him, and yet something was telling him inside that he wasn't good enough. And it's complex, as I say, it's very, very what led over the years to Jordan, getting to that point. A whole bunch of things,
Hmm.
really. And you used a really important word before, Jeff, and that was hopelessness. We know there's some very extensive studies done into suicide, and not least by Professor Rory O'Connor from the University of Glasgow over here. Something he's been doing since the mid 90s, a real pioneer in many respects with understanding suicide and how to prevent suicide. And within the model that he's developed, there are two specific areas, he said, that are that tipping point, if you like. It's this sense of entrapment,
Mm-hmm.
and that can be, I'm trapped in my relationship, I'm trapped in my job, I'm trapped with my finances,
Right.
I'm trapped within my body, who I am, whatever it might be, which often leads then to a sense of hopelessness. And once that sense of hopelessness takes over, that's the danger point then, where we need to find a way to help that person find hope again. But certainly entrapment and hopelessness are the two major driving factors there.
I hate to use the word terrified, but as a parent now, my youngest two sons. Now, was Jordan your only child, or do you? Yeah, you have
No. We got Danielle,
Danielle.
who's
Yeah,
working
I
with
was
us
going to
now
ask
at
you
the
about her
Jordan
because she's a
Legacy, of
rock star
course. Yeah.
too. She's awesome. I see her all the time
Yeah,
on your
don't forget
posts.
Danielle. She'll be tweeting. She'll be tweeting this
Hi,
afterwards.
Danielle. You're doing great. No, I love what she does to help promote your advocacy. But before I get into your advocacy, I kind of want to go back a little bit too about the mental health initiative that I know you have a few mental health initiatives going on that I want you to talk about. And then we're doing one over here with the Living Undeterred US tour. But when you look at collectively, the mental health challenges we have as a society. You have, like, for example, here in the States, and I'm sure it is the same way where you are with fentanyl poisoning. Right now in the States, it's the number one killer of Americans from 18 to 44 is overdose. And when Seth died, it was like 56,000 Americans died. Last year, it was 104. So it's gone up 100% in 5 years. And then you throw in suicide, which, you start looking at the statistics, and I got them here because I have to do a presentation, but 132 Americans die each day by suicide, and 1.4 million Americans attempt suicide. So you have that now coupled with the overdose, and then you throw in alcoholism, which what took my wife. 95,000 Americans die each year by alcoholism, which is 261 a day. So you start looking at overdose, suicide, alcoholism, put it into a box, and you look at the collateral damage, the lives that are affected. I can't imagine that every single human being you and I interact with, every single human being, isn't going to have a story that fits either overdose, suicide, or alcoholism, either themselves or somebody they know. So you and I are talking to a massive audience, unfortunately, that needs to have a spotlight shining on these things constantly. And so that is my segue to your advocacy. Let's talk about your programs. Now I want to get to the baton idea that you have, which you just told me about last time we talked, which I'm just like, I think I may fly out there. I may have to. I'm so interested in promoting this for you over here and doing what I can to support you. But your Jordan legacy that you have right now, your conference that you have, let's talk a little bit about what Steve Phillip is doing to advocate for suicide awareness, and let's kind of wrap up the next 20 minutes talking about what you're doing to turn this horrendous event into something that is, beautiful. And I'm on what you do.
Good. No, thank you, Jeff. And I totally agree with you about shining a spotlight. I've heard this very eloquently said, particularly by Mike, who I referred to earlier, who lost his son Ross. And when he talks about this statistic of suicide being the biggest killer of young men under 35, he said that if they were dying at that level by any other means, there would be a government outcry and campaigns, to stop
It's
this.
a stigma,
but
right?
somehow, because it's suicide, it's just not on the agenda, or not at the level it should be, and not under the spotlight. So certainly, yeah, I think if you look at what are we doing at the Jordan Legacy, it is about turning that spotlight brighter and brighter. Look, when I set out on this journey, probably just coming up to 2 years ago, but didn't really formalize the Jordan legacy till the October of 2020. I didn't really know what I was doing. I kind of latched onto the shirt tails of a couple of people that came along for the ride who knew much more than me.
Mm-hmm.
And very quickly we kind of understood that what the Jordan Legacy wasn't going to be about was we didn't want to just be another crisis website and a helpline and
Right.
people there to talk and listen. There are lots of fantastic organizations, and many of those are on the resource pages of our jordanlegacy.com website. But once I got to understand more about the global suicide community, where people were taking practical actions within communities and workplaces to look at what are the practical things we can do to prevent suicide, not necessarily the medical or the psychological things. What are the practical things we can be doing now? that kind of lit my fire a little bit, because I realized we could go out and talk to communities, to groups, to schools, to sports clubs. I realized I could go and talk to organizations and say, look, what are you doing? What's your process?
Hmm.
If do you know how to identify someone who might be struggling?
Right.
And if you did, would you know how to have that conversation and approach them confidently? So a lot of what we do is around that, but we very quickly established 4 layers within our own zero suicide strategy, and that was taken as a benchmark and a template for what's worked successfully globally, particularly in places like Detroit in the States, and over here in Merseycare, and over in Australia. And that was to say, there are kind of 4 areas that we think we can make a difference in. One is in the community, generally, all those places I mentioned before. Within workplaces,
Hmm.
two of the obvious places where we all spend a lot of time. But then there were 2 other layers. There were one that kind of looked at designing out the process for suicide, which might sound an odd thing. That was initially a concept that looked at any process that might lead to someone taking their life, but was very quickly adopted by the construction industry
Hmm.
around infrastructures and places, outdoor places particularly, where people might choose to take their own
Hmm.
lives.
Yeah.
How can we, design out future buildings, future
Right.
bridges, car parks, to make them less accessible, rather than what we're having to do at the moment, which is put barriers and signs up on
Sure.
existing, sometimes very beautiful looking
Yeah.
buildings, in order to prevent. What can we do to design out the future? So that was a really interesting area, and we've run a number of live conferences in all these areas online over the last year. And the other area was the digital world. What is happening in the digital world? How can we embrace technology, from AI to some of the apps that are out there, both those that are already being used around mental health and suicide prevention? We know many of the apps that are there now, but also how could we learn from technology that's being used for other reasons and purposes in other sectors that could be transferable and used within our industry. So, one of the examples of that is on construction sites. Someone we know who's developed a beacon monitoring system that can basically tell, it's somebody on a construction site that shouldn't be
Hmm.
there. Now, that would have been once upon a time used to prevent people getting onto sites who just shouldn't have been
Right.
there, and arresting them or whatever. Now, of course, they're looking at patterns of behaviour at weekends when construction sites are closed, and saying, what are the patterns we're seeing through Beacon with people accessing scaffolding and things like that,
Hmm.
and with the intention possibly of taking their own lives. So there's a lot of transferable technology. So we kind of looked at the 4 areas of workplace, community, designing out, and digital and tech with human support. Run a number of online events, and we're going to be growing further with the Jordan Legacy in the next year or two, to get people to kind of lead those particular areas. The big event for us, we finished 2021 with our Hope for Life conference, which
Yeah.
was kind of a pulling together of everything we've done so far. To have some great, inspiring speakers who'd been through really tough
Was
situations
that a
in their life
virtual
and come out the
conference
other
or was
side.
that an actual conference?
Yeah, that was a face to face. So
Great.
that took place in Harrogate. First
Great.
time we've been able to do that, really. And we had 130 people attend the event physically, and then we beamed it out via LinkedIn Live and Facebook Live to a wider audience. So, that was a real powerful end to the year. And then, within our kind of group of people, there was a conversation around what happens next,
Yeah.
and that really led to the baton of hope,
Right.
as you mentioned, or in the States and Australia, the baton, of course. I need to pronounce that correctly. And that really came from a point of view of, how do we really step this up? How do we really raise awareness? And the conversation just got around to the London 2012 Olympics, and the huge event that took place in the lead up to the Olympics, which was the torch bearing
Hmm.
processions, where people with powerful stories in white tracksuits in different cities around the UK carried the torch and passed it on to one person to another. People came out on the streets, it was on screens, big screens, small screens, just brought everyone together in a way that hadn't been seen before. What was also important was what the London Olympic Committee did and group, probably better than a lot of other cities, was that they left this fantastic legacy afterwards.
Right.
where all these centres that were used and all the goodwill and everything that happened was then carried on afterwards to leave a legacy. So the flame kept burning for longer than just that
Sure.
summer of 2012. So the Baton of Hope, really, really simple. It is going to replicate what happened at London 2012, where the baton is going to be carried most likely by people bereaved by suicide or with a very close connection to that. And it will be passing through all the regions of the UK. And in all those regions, we're going to be looking for leaders and champions in that area to put on events in their region and area. And whether this is live music festivals, whether this is kids at school, whether this is talks in
Hmm.
county halls or wherever it is, whether this is people sharing, most importantly, examples of what they're doing to save lives and prevent suicide, where there's evidence it's working. We really want to support this statement that a lot of the experts will share, and most of us absolutely believe that with the right interventions, most suicides are preventable. And that's where we're coming from. So we want to be able to demonstrate and, if you like, qualify that statement through evidence as we go around the country. So what will happen afterwards is that this baton will end up in a place of some meaning. There's a lot of talk about whether this will be the Houses of Parliament and the Legislative Office there. So the legislators see this with a mandate and a charter from the people. So there's a reminder for them every day, but it will be a meaningful place. And then we will have replica batons around the country and events that will take place each year afterwards. Yeah, I've just come off a meeting this morning with someone who we've been looking for, who has experience of working on the London 2012 campaign and other fairly significant political campaigns here. He's been right in at the sharp end, and I was really emotional at that meeting this morning because we had our steering group, Mike, that I mentioned, and Ian and Paul and
Yeah.
Danielle. We were
Yep.
there, and I won't give away who this person is just yet because we're kind of decompressing from that meeting
Sure.
this morning. But I looked at the nods and the smiles around the Zoom call this morning. And, if we were excited about this before, we were kind of through the roof by the end of this conversation this morning, because for the first time, we've found this route that's going to make
Yeah.
this happen, we believe, because it'll be someone working with us that's been on that journey before. And it was quite spooky, the similarities of what he'd been involved with before and what we're doing. So this is by far going to be the biggest suicide awareness and prevention event that this country has ever seen. There won't be anything like it at all. And the interest already is gathering pace over here, which is really exciting.
As I listen to what you are saying, I am taken back to the beauty of vulnerability and the power that being vulnerable can create, the velocity that telling your story can manifest and just become this thing almost out of control. And I notice it when I tell, what happened to in our situation. And then you open that door and then people take it. And I'm sure when you talk to strangers or people that don't know anything about what you're doing, and then they ask a question, what do you do? And you're like, how much time do I have? It's like, how do I answer that question without scaring this person away? Because I want to talk about this for hours. If someone asks you, what do you do? Then you realize, okay, now's my chance. I'll crack the door and then I'll let them tell me their story. And that's I think the real beauty of what you and myself and all the people you and I meet that have taken this initiative to become vulnerable. But then again, if we're not, this would be eating you and I from the inside, and then this would become our downfall instead of our instead of what defines us. This would be our downfall. And I think people can look at what you're doing. I look at you and I think that's absolutely awesome what you're doing. And just 2 years ago, he passed away in 19. So 2 years, yeah. You never envisioned or imagined that this would be your why in life. And you're living proof, Steve, that horrendous things can happen, but they certainly don't have to be the beginning of the end of you. And I have to think you're going to spawn a lot of people that, I want copycats, and so do you. We want advocacy. There's no competition out there. And sometimes you meet some people that I know I have in some of the things we've done where I don't think they feel threatened, but I think they don't see this as a group effort. I have no ego in this thing, and I'm sure you don't either. And as you're going across with your baton, or how you say it, baton, or
yeah. No, that's pretty close. That's good.
you're going to be running into people that are going to say, "Well, Steve, I wish I had the desire to do what you're doing. I wish I had maybe the time. I wish I had the knowledge level, but I want to be a part of what you're doing. I want to carry that baton or for a while. I want to support you." And so I'm proud of what you're doing. I think it's unbelievable. And I think what you're doing, you say it's going to be the biggest one there. There'll be something bigger down the road that you have spawned. Somebody will jump on your back and do something. At the end of the day, some, middle school kid sitting at his desk at school, drawing pictures on a piece of paper that are, cryptic because he's considering taking his own life. Maybe that kid somewhere along the line, somebody you touched, that kid will decide that today's not the day I'm going to do this. I'll kick that down the road to tomorrow,
Yeah.
And I applaud you.
That's
I
what it's
applaud
all
you and
about.
Danielle and everybody you're doing at the Jordan Legacy to bring attention to this, this epidemic, really, if you think about it. And it's so
Yeah, no,
unnecessary.
thank you, Jim. Yeah, it's difficult. Well, even a statement like that is so unnecessary. Yet it's almost like a statement of frustration, isn't it? And I absolutely get it. I think the important thing to kind of just turn that around a little bit finally is that there is another path. There is, I think, and it's easy to say, look, there is hope when you're speaking to someone who feels they have no hope. But sometimes just being able to calmly say that, to someone, to say, look, I know you can't see this right now. Absolutely get it. But there is hope, and if you'll let me, we'll help you find that hope. That is. Yeah, that's really important.
I just want to
Yeah.
give you a hug.
knew
I
I
want to
wouldn't
give
make
you
it-
a
I
hug,
knew I
brother.
wouldn't make it to the end.
I just want to reach out. I just want to reach out and give you a hug, man.
Yeah.
Certainly,
Yeah.
the weight of your tears shift, and it used to be full of pain and sorrow, and now it's full of hope and inspiration. And
Yeah,
I
definitely.
admire the way that you can look at that. But before we leave, I thought I'd ask you if there was one thing that you could change about the stigma behind people taking their own lives. Even the word committed now, I love that you guys have taken that word off the table. And I don't have suicide that's affected me, but it has by knowing you and some other advocates. But I've taken that committed suicide off the table. And I'm starting to have that influence on people around me, because committed sounds like you committed a crime. And that would be one stigma I would like to see changed for what you're doing. What would be one or two you can think of that come to mind that if you could be king for a day, you could eradicate a certain stigma or two? What would it be in regards to suicide?
Yeah, I think it's one really, Jeff. It's one big one, and it was summed up really by the person we were speaking to this morning at the meeting, who had had his own mental health struggles, and he kind of summed this up really well. And he said, what this battle is going to be about is breaking down this stigma to allow this conversation to happen. And he said, look, when I was going through the stuff that I was going through, and he said, I was very nearly one of those statistics we've talked about. He said, it wasn't a case that I was looking for professional support or help. I kind of knew there were places out there. He said, what I really struggled with was being able to tell my friends and my mates, because I thought they would judge me or wouldn't take me seriously or whatever. So I think the biggest goal we can all aim for is to normalize this conversation, to recognize that this isn't just a cry for help for somebody who's having a bad day. This is someone who's really, really concerned, and we all need to be able to. I hate to use this word because I think it's kind of thrown away so often, but it is the word kindness. I think if we're all just a little kinder to each other, a little bit more tolerant. And hey, we're all living busy lives. We're all stressed out. I get stressed out behind the wheel of a car,
Hmm.
and I'm calmer probably than I was a couple of
Yeah.
years ago, and a little bit more considerate about what that person might be going through, because I was that guy 2 years ago driving a car when my mind was numb. Probably should never have been on the road after what had happened, and
Yeah.
I just hoped somebody would forgive me for forgetting to turn the traffic the indicators on, or turn signals, or whatever I didn't do that day. And I think we just need to kind of always just consider that someone might be behaving a little differently, a little oddly in our view, but maybe they've just got some stuff going on.
Oh, spot on.
And if we
Spot on.
could just listen, ask the question and listen, maybe we just all have a very different perspective. That's a big ask.
Right.
But it's, you said if I had this magic wand or
Right.
whatever it would be, king for a day, then yeah, we would all, including myself, be just a little bit more patient, a bit more tolerant, a bit more considerate. And as Stephen Covey, famous Stephen Covey, once said, let's all seek to understand first.
Yeah. When you
Yeah.
think of somebody that you see that reacts in a, like you cut them off by accident, let's say, and they flip you off or something, and you're with your kids, the initial inclination a lot of people is to flip them off back, and get mad back at them. But when you're with your kids, you can use that as a moment of saying, hey, that person may have just lost their job. They may have just got the divorce papers sent to them. They may have just lost their business in a bad investment deal. We don't know anything about that person. So, and you can teach your kids those moments. So kids will end up kind of maybe emulating you when you get older. If they see how you react in these situations, that's kind of the way we can start moving the needle in these, to make our society more compassionate, more empathetic, which I think is certainly a good starting point that we all can control. I mean, I can't control what other
Hey
people
Jeff, I've
do.
lost you completely.
Okay.
Don't know if you can still hear
Yeah, I
me.
think I think we're okay. Yeah, there you go. Molly texted me and
Oh, you're
said
back. Sorry, I lost audio
that's
and
okay.
your video complete.
Molly said that she can edit this, and I think the
Great.
local recording will be good to go. But yeah, we can
Excellent.
wrap this up. But I think what I'd like to do is we talked about empathy and compassion as ways that we as individuals can contribute to trying to change the narrative and move the needle. More understanding of what people are going through. So when someone's having a bad day, maybe, arm on their shoulder, anything I can do to help you, instead of just immediately getting upset. And then being more attentive, more, being a better listener, to what people are going through, instead of always wanting to tell our situation. It's like, yeah, but, you got a great story, Steve, but let me do, and you start going into your narrative. I think we need to all of us need to get better at just letting people talk, and sometimes venting, letting it all out.
Yeah.
As we wrap up the show, what's next? What do you have? What's on the plate for you next? Do you have a book? Do you have a movie?
I'm some weeks behind on chapter 3 of the book. I've got to find a way to get into that, but things are just so busy. We've got our next kind of online conference coming up on March the 29th. Not great timing for our US audience. Need to rethink that one next time. It's 11 a.m. UK time, but we're doing another online conference. Really important one. It's around from our community strategy. It's around schools and young people, and we lose in this country 200 pre-high school children to
Mm,
suicide every year. You know,
mm.
that's just unreal, isn't it? When you think
Makes
about
you
that, and
cringe. Yeah.
I just got a message from a lady this morning who messaged me on LinkedIn, and she'd lost her 14-year-old son to suicide last April, and so we are losing kids to suicide, and too many of them. So it's a panel discussion event. So I'm kind of planning for that. That's my next task immediately after this, is just to update the Eventbrite page. I'm really kind of pleased at the response our events have had really over the last year. We've already got 60 people registered to attend
Great.
this on March the 29th.
Great.
We're a month away yet. And so I think we're going to have another 300 or 400 people attending this event, with some really great panel experts talking about issues relating to young people and school children now, and mental health and suicide. So that's going to be interesting. So that's a bit of focus. But the baton at the moment is the big focus. We are at very early days. Once we get the momentum and things start falling in place, but we have to get the fundamentals right in terms of the national strategy for it, and then we can start reaching out to the regions and the communities who are chomping at the bit, want to get involved with this. How can we help? And we're not quite ready to let them know how they can help yet. But so we've got a few weeks ahead of really getting all this nailed down, because we're looking at May 2023. That's not that far away.
I can understand. Our tour starts on May 9th of this year, and we started the planning of it last May. So I certainly can relate to that, and it's terrifying to think how you're going to pull this off. Yet that's what makes it exciting and exhilarating, is building it. And we have a saying, and I'll end with this, and I'm sure you can relate to this: is we're building the boat on the water. We're not trying to build this thing and then shove off. We're out in the water, hammers and nails, trying to build this boat. And that's kind of how I look at the tour that we have coming up. But listen, I'm honored to be in your presence today. I'm happy to call you a friend now, and I'm certainly a massive advocate and a beacon of hope out here across the pond for you. And I'll do what I can to support you in the best ways I can. And when we're on our tour, I want to find a way I can link you in at one of my presentations and have you say a few words. We have 3 or 4 of our stops right now. We have 30 states on board for our U.S. tour. We've got some really big name, like you said. We've got some huge facilities involved.
Yeah, I've been tracking some of what you're doing, Jeff. Just amazing. Absolutely.
But I want to find a time on one of our stops that's going to be a key on suicide awareness. And I have a couple right now that we can bring you in on a Zoom and pull it off with the time zone difference and all that. Have you say a few words to the audiences and talk a little bit about the issues you're having over there, because we get so wrapped up in what happens in our own countries that I see that number. I know 800 is a big number for us to wrap our hands on, but 800,000 people globally, that's just too many. There's got to be. I always say, and I'm no expert in suicide, and maybe you can help me on this, but if there's a way you could resurrect those that had taken their own lives, my guess is that almost all of them would have regretted that decision.
Well, we know that to be true, Jeff, because of the studies done with people who've attempted, and that's a whole different discussion.
Right.
But yeah, we know that most occasions that is the case. Yeah.
Well, you're making a massive difference, and I love you like a brother, and appreciate what you're doing, and keep living undeterred, which I don't think you're ever going to have a problem with that. So with that, thank you. Thank you for being on the show. And where can people reach you?
The best way is probably either through LinkedIn. So Steve Phillip, I think my name's spelled correctly on the screen there. 2 L's, 1 P, no S at the end of my last name. Yep. All the things that people get wrong. They even call me Phil, So Steve Phillip on LinkedIn. You can find me because it's slightly unusual spelling. And thejordanlegacy.com website.
All right. Well, I'll tag everybody when I post this. And again, have a great rest of your day, and keep up your advocacy, and keep living undeterred, my friend.